The golden Ferrari's engine roared to silence as Carolina Williams stepped onto the white marble driveway like a queen reclaiming her throne. 5 identical 6-year-olds tumbling out behind her in matching blue dresses, their hazel eyes boring into the man who had called her mother too old and infertile before abandoning her 6 years ago. Gustavo's wedding guests gasped in horror as the math hit them, realizing the groom was staring at quintuplets he never knew existed while about to marry the sister who had stolen him away. But when Carolina opened her mouth to speak, what she revealed about her transformation from homeless and desperate to billionaire empire builder would shatter more than just a wedding. It would expose the most devastating betrayal in Hampton's society. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's continue.
The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured grounds of the Topping Rose house as Carolina Lim stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her emerald silk dress. Her reflection showed a woman transformed. At 38, she possessed a confidence that radiated from within, her dark hair styled in an elegant updo that showcased diamond earrings worth more than most people's homes. "Mommy, are we really going to see Daddy today?" asked Destiny, one of her 5 identical daughters, as she bounced on the king-sized bed behind her. Carolina turned to face her quintuplets: Destiny, Poppy, Adilyn, Harlow, and Veda, all 6 years old, all bearing their father's distinctive hazel eyes and stubborn chin. They wore matching royal blue dresses with white ribbons, their hair braided identically, looking like a small army of determination. "Yes, sweetheart. Today you'll finally meet your father," Carolina replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing in her chest. "But remember what we practiced." "We stay close to you," chorused Poppy, the most outspoken of the 5. "We don't talk to strangers," added Adilyn, always the rule follower. "And we hold hands when we walk," finished Harlow and Veda together, the twins who seemed to share one mind. Carolina knelt down, gathering all 5 into her arms. "That's right. Today might feel overwhelming, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" 5 little heads nodded in unison, and Carolina felt her heart swell with pride and protection. These beautiful children had never known their father, had never needed him, because she had been enough. But today would change everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ford Benson. "The car is ready. Are you sure about this?" She typed back, "6 years of silence ends today." Ford had been her business partner for 4 years now, the brilliant architect who'd helped design her tech empire from the ground up. He'd also become something more, a steady presence who loved her daughters as if they were his own, who'd never once made her feel inadequate or unwanted. "Miss Carolina," called her assistant's voice from downstairs. "The Ferrari is here." Carolina smiled. The golden Ferrari F40 LM, one of only 19 ever made, worth exactly $100 million, had been her first major purchase after her company went public. Not because she needed it, but because she could afford it. Because the woman Gustavo Ramos had called too old and infertile had built an empire that dwarfed his inherited millions. "You're 32, Carolina. Face the facts. You're getting old, and after 3 years of trying, it's obvious you can't give me children. I need a woman who can actually fulfill her basic biological function." Gustavo's words had cut through their penthouse like shattered glass 6 years earlier. Carolina had stood frozen in their kitchen, the romantic dinner she'd prepared growing cold on the table, a positive pregnancy test hidden in her purse, the surprise she'd planned to give him that very evening. "I'm in love with Miranda. She's everything you're not: young, fertile, exciting. She makes me feel alive again." Miranda, her 24-year-old sister, with her platinum blonde hair and curves that had never carried a child. The sister who'd always resented Carolina's success, who'd smiled sweetly while plotting behind her back. "Pack your things," Gustavo had continued, not even looking at her. I want you out by morning. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Carolina had left that night with one suitcase and the pregnancy test, too shocked to fight, too heartbroken to reveal the truth growing inside her. Let him marry Miranda. Let him live with his choice. She would raise their children alone. Now, present day, 20 miles away, Gustavo Ramos adjusted his platinum cufflinks for the 5th time, staring at his reflection in the groom's sweet mirror. At 45, he'd maintained his athletic build through personal trainers and expensive treatments, his salt and pepper hair giving him what Miranda called distinguished appeal. "Stop fidgeting," Miranda snapped from across the room, where 3 stylists worked on her elaborate updo. "You look fine. Fine. Not handsome, not excited, not in love. Just fine." The truth was, Gustavo had been feeling anything but fine for months now. The initial passion he'd felt for Miranda had faded into routine, their conversations revolving around social events and shopping rather than dreams and hopes. She'd given him everything he thought he wanted: youth, beauty, fertility, yet something felt hollow. "Your mother called again," Miranda continued, not bothering to hide her irritation. "She's still asking about Carolina. When are you going to tell that old woman to mind her own business?" Gustavo's jaw tightened. His mother, Mila Stanton, had never forgiven him for leaving Carolina. For 6 years, she'd made her disappointment crystal clear, refusing to attend today's wedding until the very last minute. "Miranda, please. Not today. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. I'm sick of hearing about your ex-wife. She disappeared. Gustavo. She obviously moved on, so why can't you?" But that was just it. Carolina hadn't just moved on. She'd vanished completely. No forwarding address, no social media presence, no trace of the woman who'd once been his everything before he'd convinced himself she wasn't enough. A knock interrupted his thoughts. "Mr. Ramos," called the wedding coordinator. "The guests are arriving. We'll be ready to begin in 30 minutes. 30 minutes until he married Miranda. 30 minutes until he officially closed the chapter on his past." So why did his chest feel tight with something that felt suspiciously like regret? "Did you remember to invite the Hendersons?" Miranda asked, applying another coat of lipstick. "Yes." "And the Kellys from the country club?" "Yes." "Good. I want everyone to see what a real wedding looks like. Not like that sad little ceremony you had with Carolina at City Hall." Gustavo winced. His wedding to Carolina had been small by choice. They'd wanted intimacy over spectacle, meaning over show. She'd worn a simple white dress and carried wildflowers, looking more beautiful than any bride he'd ever seen. She'd promised to love him through everything, to build a life together that mattered. And he'd thrown it all away for a woman who saw marriage as a social media opportunity. "The photographer wants some pictures before the ceremony," Miranda said, standing and smoothing her elaborate gown. The dress cost more than most people's cars, all crystals and silk and dramatic trains. It was everything Carolina's simple dress hadn't been. "In a minute," Gustavo replied, suddenly needing air. "Gustavo," I said now. "Do you want to keep our guests waiting?" Our guests. Most of them were Miranda's friends from her modeling days, people who knew him only as her older, wealthy fiancé. The guest list read like a social climber's dream. All the right names, all the right connections, all the wrong reasons for celebrating. As he followed Miranda out of the suite, Gustavo couldn't shake the feeling that he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Again. The wedding ceremony had begun 20 minutes ago under a canopy of white roses and crystal chandeliers hanging from ancient oak trees. 300 guests filled ivory chairs arranged in perfect rows across the manicured lawn, their attention focused on the altar where Gustavo stood beside the officiant, waiting for his bride. Miranda's entrance had been everything she'd dreamed of. A string quartet played Canon in D as she walked down the rose-petal-strewn aisle in her $50,000 gown, her train flowing behind her like liquid silk. Camera flashes captured every angle as society photographers documented what Miranda had declared would be the wedding of the century. "Dearly beloved," the officiant began, his voice carrying across the garden, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Gustavo Ramos and Miranda Mathis in holy matrimony." Gustavo forced a smile, trying to focus on Miranda's face beneath her cathedral-length veil. She looked radiant, exactly as a bride should look. So why did he feel like he was attending a funeral instead of his own wedding? "Marriage is a sacred bond," the officiant continued, "built on trust, commitment, and unconditional love that endures through all of life's challenges." Trust. The word hit Gustavo like a physical blow. He'd trusted Carolina completely, and she'd trusted him. Until he'd shattered that trust with his cruelty and selfishness. If anyone has a reason why this couple should not be wed, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional words hung in the air like a challenge. Gustavo held his breath, almost hoping someone would object, would give him an excuse to stop this charade. But the garden remained silent except for the gentle rustling of leaves in the afternoon breeze. Then they heard it. A low rumble in the distance, growing louder by the second. Heads began to turn toward the main driveway as the sound became unmistakable, the roar of a high-performance engine approaching at speed. "What is that?" whispered Mrs. Henderson, one of Miranda's society friends. The rumble grew thunderous as it rounded the final curve of the estate's private road. Then, through the line of trees, guests caught their first glimpse of something that defied explanation. A golden Ferrari, its metallic paint catching the afternoon sun like liquid fire. "Oh my God!" gasped someone in the crowd. The car didn't slow down. If anything, it accelerated, heading straight for the wedding area with the confidence of someone who belonged there. The engine's roar drowned out the string quartet, forcing them to stop playing as every head turned to watch this unprecedented interruption. "Security!" Miranda hissed from beneath her veil, but the guard seemed as transfixed as everyone else. The Ferrari came to a dramatic stop just 20 feet from the altar, its engine ticking as it cooled. For a moment, absolute silence blanketed the garden. 300 wedding guests held their collective breath, waiting to see who would emerge from the most expensive car most of them had ever seen. The driver's door opened with precision, and a woman stepped out with the grace of someone who owned the world. She wore an emerald silk dress that hugged her curves perfectly, her dark hair swept up to showcase diamond earrings that caught the light like stars. At 38, she possessed a beauty that had nothing to do with youth and everything to do with confidence earned through survival. Carolina Williams stood beside the golden Ferrari like a queen surveying her kingdom. But she wasn't alone. One by one, 5 identical 6-year-old girls emerged from the passenger side of the car, their royal blue dresses a stark contrast to the golden vehicle. They moved with the synchronized precision of a drill team, each taking their place beside their mother in a perfect line. Destiny, Poppy, Adilyn, Harlow, and Veda. 5 little girls with Gustavo's hazel eyes and stubborn chin, staring at the crowd with a fearless curiosity of children who had never been taught to doubt their worth. "Hello, Gustavo," Carolina said, her voice carrying clearly across the stunned garden. She didn't shout, didn't need to. When Carolina Williams spoke, people listened. Gustavo's face had gone completely white. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, no sound emerging. His eyes moved frantically between Carolina's face and the 5 children beside her, mathematics and biology warring in his brain as he tried to process what he was seeing. "What? Who?" He stammered, the first words he'd spoken since the Ferrari arrived. "These are your daughters," Carolina said simply, placing protective hands on Poppy and Destiny's shoulders. Destiny, Poppy, Adilyn, Harlow, and Veda. They're 6 years old today. Funny how that works out, don't you think? A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the implications hit them. 6 years old. Born 9 months after Gustavo had thrown Carolina out for being too old and infertile. "That's impossible," Miranda shrieked, her carefully applied makeup beginning to run as panic set in. "You said she couldn't have children. You said she was barren." "I said a lot of things," Gustavo whispered, his voice barely audible. "I was wrong about everything." The wedding photographer, trained to capture every important moment, raised his camera instinctively. The flash went off, immortalizing the exact instant when Gustavo's world collapsed and rebuilt itself around 5 little girls he'd never known existed. "Mommy," Adilyn whispered, tugging on Carolina's dress. "Is that really our daddy?" Carolina knelt down to her daughter's level, her voice gentle but strong enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, sweetheart. That's your father." "Why does he look scared?" asked Harlow, tilting her head with innocent curiosity. "Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes," Carolina replied, standing gracefully and facing Gustavo directly. "And sometimes those mistakes have consequences they never expected." The officiant, a man who'd performed hundreds of weddings but never witnessed anything like this, cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should postpone the ceremony until—" "No!" Miranda's voice reached a pitch that made several birds take flight from nearby trees. "This is my wedding day. I won't let this woman ruin it with her lies and manipulation." She turned to Gustavo, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "Tell her to leave, Gustavo. Call security. This is harassment." But Gustavo wasn't looking at Miranda anymore. His entire focus had shifted to the 5 little girls standing beside Carolina like sentinels. Each one was a perfect blend of his and Carolina's features, living proof of the love he'd thrown away and the children he'd never known he'd helped create. "They have my eyes," he whispered, wonder creeping into his voice. "And your stubborn streak," Carolina replied with a hint of a smile. "Particularly Poppy. She refuses to eat vegetables and argues with her tutors about mathematical principles she doesn't understand yet." Tutors. Gustavo's business mind kicked in despite his emotional turmoil. "You can afford—" "I can afford a lot of things now," Carolina interrupted smoothly. "Including this car." She gestured to the Ferrari behind her. "It's worth exactly $100 million. I bought it because I could, not because I needed to prove anything to anyone." The number hit the crowd like a physical force. $100 million for a single car meant wealth that dwarfed most of their combined net worth. This wasn't just Carolina returning. This was Carolina returning as someone more powerful than anyone had imagined possible. "How?" Gustavo asked, genuine amazement replacing his shock. "Hard work, brilliant partners, and the motivation that comes from raising 5 children alone while building an empire." Carolina's voice carried no bitterness, only fact. "Turns out the woman you called too old and infertile was just getting started." Mila Stanton, Gustavo's mother, stood up from her seat in the front row. At 72, she moved with purpose toward the group of strangers who were somehow also her granddaughters. "Carolina, my dear," she said, tears streaming down her face. "These beautiful girls, they're really—" "Your granddaughters," Carolina confirmed, her voice softening as she addressed the only member of Gustavo's family who had ever truly loved her. "Girls, this is your grandmother, Mila. She's been waiting to meet you for a very long time." 5 little voices chorused, "Hello, Grandmother Mila," with perfect politeness, their manners impeccable despite the chaos surrounding them. Mila knelt despite her age, gathering as many of the girls as she could reach into her arms. "My beautiful granddaughters, I've missed so much time with you." "We can fix that," Carolina said gently. "If you want to be part of their lives, you're welcome." The offer hung in the air like a gift and a challenge combined. Forgiveness offered freely, despite 6 years of absence and silence. Miranda, realizing she'd lost control of the narrative completely, made one last desperate attempt to salvage her day. "This is ridiculous. Even if those children are his, which I doubt, that doesn't change anything. Gustavo chose me. We're getting married today." She turned to the crowd, her voice reaching a fever pitch. "Don't let this attention-seeking woman ruin our perfect day with her convenient timing and manufactured drama." But the wedding guests weren't looking at Miranda anymore. 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on the 5 little girls who had just turned their understanding of family, loyalty, and consequence completely upside down. The golden Ferrari gleamed in the afternoon sun behind them, a symbol of transformation so complete it defied belief. The woman they remembered as Gustavo's quiet, devoted wife had returned as someone entirely new, yet somehow exactly who she'd always been meant to be. The silence stretched for exactly 17 seconds. Then chaos erupted. "This is a setup," Miranda screamed, pointing an accusatory finger at Carolina. "You planned this. You've been watching us, waiting for the perfect moment to destroy my happiness." Her wedding dress, which had looked so magnificent during her entrance, now seemed overdone and desperate against the backdrop of 5 quietly confident children in simple blue dresses. The contrast was striking and unmistakable. "Security!" Miranda shrieked again, but the hired guards remained frozen, uncertain how to handle a situation involving children and what appeared to be a legitimate family emergency. Meanwhile, wedding guests began pulling out their phones, some recording video while others frantically texted updates to friends who weren't present. The society photographers, initially hired to capture Miranda's perfect day, now focused entirely on Carolina and the quintuplets. "Put those cameras away," Miranda demanded, her voice cracking with hysteria. "This is a private event." But it was too late. The images were already spreading across social media platforms. #RamosWedding began trending within minutes, though not for the reasons Miranda had hoped. Gustavo stood motionless at the altar, his mind racing as he stared at his daughters. The children remained calm despite the adult chaos swirling around them, their hands linked in a protective chain as Carolina had taught them. "These aren't my children," he said suddenly, his voice carrying across the garden despite his attempt at quiet denial. "The timing doesn't work. Carolina and we tried for years. She couldn't get pregnant." "Couldn't?" Carolina raised an eyebrow, her tone remaining level despite the insult. "Or wouldn't, with a man who was already planning to abandon her." "That's not true," Gustavo protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Really?" Carolina reached into her purse and withdrew a manila envelope, thick with documents. "Would you like to see the DNA test results I had done when they were born? Or perhaps the medical records showing I conceived exactly 2 weeks before you threw me out?" She held up a single sheet of paper so the crowd could see official letterhead and scientific data. 99.9% probability of paternity. These are your children, Gustavo, whether you want to accept responsibility or not. Dr. Francis Gordon, Gustavo's longtime physician who was among the wedding guests, stepped forward. "Gustavo, if you'd like verification, I can arrange independent testing. But those children..." He studied the quintuplets carefully. "The resemblance is unmistakable. They have your facial structure, your eye color, even your posture." "This is insane." Miranda's makeup was now completely ruined, black streaks running down her cheeks. "Even if he did father some bastard children with this woman, it doesn't matter. We're legally married." "Actually," the officiant interrupted nervously, "the ceremony wasn't completed. I hadn't pronounced you husband and wife when the interruption occurred." Miranda whirled on him with fury. "Then finish it. Right now. Ignore this circus and marry us." But Gustavo was no longer listening to Miranda. He was studying his daughters with the intensity of a man trying to solve the most important puzzle of his life. Each girl had distinctive features despite being identical quintuplets. Destiny had his serious expression. Poppy possessed his argumentative stance. Adilon showed his careful attention to detail. Harlow and Veda shared his habit of tilting their heads when thinking. "How?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "How what?" Carolina asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. "How did you manage 5 babies alone? The pregnancy alone could have killed you. Quintuplets are incredibly high risk, and you had no support, no help." For the first time since arriving, Carolina's composure flickered. A shadow passed across her face as she remembered those terrifying months. "I nearly died," she admitted quietly. "Spent 4 months on bed rest in a charity hospital because I had no insurance after you canceled my coverage. The girls were born at 28 weeks. They spent 3 months in the NICU while I lived in my car in the hospital parking lot." The crowd grew silent again, absorbing the horror of what she was describing. "You lived in your car?" Mila Stanton gasped, her voice breaking. "For 6 months," Carolina confirmed. "Until I met Ira Goodman." "Who's Ira Goodman?" Gustavo demanded, a strange note of jealousy creeping into his voice. "My mentor. My business partner. The man who taught me that being abandoned doesn't mean being defeated." Carolina's strength returned as she spoke. "He's also the grandfather my daughters chose for themselves when their biological grandfather wasn't available." Mila flinched at the implied criticism, but didn't argue. She'd known something was wrong when Carolina disappeared, but she'd respected her son's decision instead of following her instincts. "Where is he now?" Gustavo asked. "Waiting in the car," Carolina replied. "He wanted to give you the chance to meet your daughters without interference. But if you continue denying their existence, he'll be happy to escort us away from this spectacle." She gestured toward the abandoned wedding setup, the scattered rose petals now trampled by confused guests, the string quartet packing their instruments in bewildered silence. "I'm not denying anything," Gustavo exploded, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "I'm trying to understand how my entire life just got turned upside down by information I should have known 6 years ago." "You should have known," Carolina agreed, her voice like steel. "But you threw me out before I could tell you. You decided I was worthless and barren without giving me a chance to prove otherwise. I was young and stupid. You were 39 years old. Gustavo, that's not young. That's old enough to know better." Miranda, realizing she'd completely lost control of the situation, made one final desperate play. "Even if those children are his, which I still doubt, they're illegitimate. I'm his wife. I have legal rights." "Actually," came a new voice from behind the crowd, "you're not his wife yet." Everyone turned to see a distinguished black man in his 70s approaching the group. Ira Goodman walked with the confidence of someone accustomed to command, his silver hair and expensive suit suggesting both wisdom and wealth. Behind him walked a younger man in his 30s, tall and broad-shouldered with kind eyes and an easy smile. "Ira," Carolina said warmly, her first genuine smile since arriving. "Carolina, my dear. And my beautiful granddaughters." Ira's face lit up as the quintuplets broke ranks to run to him. "How are my brilliant girls?" "Grandpa Ira," they chorused, hugging him with obvious affection. The sight of 5 children showing such genuine love for a man who wasn't their biological grandfather sent another shock wave through the crowd. These children had family. They had love. They had support. They'd never needed Gustavo at all. "And this is Ford Benson," Carolina continued, gesturing to the younger man. "My business partner and, well, someone very special to all of us." Ford's relationship to the family became clear as the children gravitated toward him as well, calling him Uncle Ford with the same affection they'd shown Ira. Here was a man who'd been present for birthdays, scraped knees, bedtime stories, and all the moments Gustavo had missed. "Uncle Ford, did you see Daddy's face when we got out of the car?" Poppy asked with 6-year-old directness. "I did, sweetheart." "He looked very surprised," Ford replied, his voice gentle but his eyes hard as they studied Gustavo. "Surprised," Gustavo repeated, his voice rising. "I just discovered I have 5 children I never knew existed. Surprised doesn't begin to cover it." "Lower your voice," Ford said quietly, but with unmistakable authority. "You're scaring the children. Don't tell me how to talk to my own daughters." "Your daughters." Ford stepped closer, his protective instincts fully engaged. "These children have never heard your voice before today. I've been the one reading them bedtime stories, teaching them to ride bikes, and holding them when they cry. What exactly makes them yours besides DNA? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Biology versus presence. Genetics versus love. Fatherhood versus being a father. They're mine because they're mine, Gustavo said weakly. That's not how parenthood works, Carolina interrupted. Parenthood is earned through presence, sacrifice, and unconditional love. It's not a right you claim. It's a privilege you earn every single day. Miranda, forgotten in the family drama unfolding around her, finally snapped completely. "This is my wedding," she screamed at the top of her lungs. "My day. My moment. I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for." She lunged toward Carolina with her manicured nails extended like claws, but Ford intercepted her easily, catching her wrists and holding her firmly but gently. "Ma'am, you need to calm down," he said. "There are children present." "I don't care about her bastard children. This is my wedding. Mine." The ugly words hit the quintuplets like physical blows. Destiny, the most sensitive of the five, began to tear up. Dylan instinctively moved to comfort her sister. Poppy's jaw set in an expression identical to her father's when angry. "Aunt Miranda said a bad word," Harlow observed. "Several bad words," Veda added. Carolina knelt down, gathering her daughters close. "Girls, remember what we discussed. Some people say hurtful things when they're scared or angry. It doesn't make the words true." "But why is she angry at us?" Destiny asked, her voice small. "We didn't do anything wrong." "No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. You're perfect exactly as you are." Gustavo watched this exchange with growing recognition. Carolina was raising their children with grace, wisdom, and unconditional love. She was teaching them strength and kindness in equal measure. She was being the mother he'd never allowed her the chance to be when they were married. And he'd thrown it all away for a woman who just called his children bastards. "Nobody leaves this property until we sort this out legally," announced Detective Bodie Harden as he approached the chaotic wedding scene, his badge clearly visible on his navy blue jacket. Behind him walked two uniformed officers and a woman in a sharp gray suit carrying a briefcase. The East Hampton police had arrived within 20 minutes of the first 911 call, though exactly who had made that call remained unclear. Some guests claimed Miranda had called for help. Others insisted it was concerned family members worried about the children's welfare. "Detective, this is a private event," Gustavo protested, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "We don't need police intervention." "Sir, we received multiple reports of a domestic disturbance involving minor children," Detective Harden replied professionally. "Until we can verify the welfare and custody status of these children, everyone involved needs to remain available for questioning." The woman in the gray suit stepped forward. "I'm Capri Juarez from Suffolk County Child Protective Services. I need to speak with the children and verify their living situation." Carolina's protective instincts flared immediately. "My daughters are not in any danger. They're well cared for, healthy, and loved." "Ma'am, I'm sure they are, but protocol requires verification when children are present during a domestic dispute," Ms. Juarez explained gently. "This is routine, not accusatory." "There's no domestic dispute," Carolina said firmly. "These are my children. I brought them to meet their father. That's not a crime." "But causing a public disturbance is," Miranda interjected shrilly, mascara still streaking her cheeks. "She deliberately sabotaged my wedding. I want her arrested for harassment and trespassing." Detective Harden looked around at the 300 wedding guests, the abandoned altar, and the golden Ferrari parked incongruously among the luxury sedans and SUVs. "Ma'am, from what I can see, this appears to be a family matter that got complicated. Nobody's getting arrested unless someone commits an actual crime." "She did commit a crime. She ruined my wedding." "Interrupting a wedding isn't illegal," the detective replied patiently. especially if she has legitimate family business with the groom. Family business? Miranda's voice reached a new octave. She's his ex-wife. They're divorced. Actually, came another voice from the crowd. They're not. Everyone turned to see Joaquin Sherman, Gustavo's longtime attorney, making his way through the gathered guests. His face was grim as he approached the group. What do you mean they're not divorced? Gustavo demanded. The divorce was never finalized, Joaquin explained reluctantly. You filed the papers, but Carolina never signed them. Without both signatures, the marriage remains legally valid. The implications hit like a thunderbolt. Miranda's face went white, then red, then purple with rage. That's impossible. We've been planning this wedding for 2 years. You said the divorce was complete. I said the papers were filed, Joaquin corrected carefully. I assumed Carolina would sign them, but she disappeared before the process could be completed. So what does that mean? Detective Harden asked, pulling out a notepad. It means Gustavo Ramos is still legally married to Carolina Williams, Joaquin answered. Any ceremony performed today would be invalid due to existing matrimonial bonds. Miranda let out a sound somewhere between a scream and a sob. This can't be happening. This can't be real. Oh, it's very real, Carolina said quietly. I never signed those papers because I was too busy giving birth to quintuplets and trying to survive. Divorce paperwork seemed less important than keeping 5 premature babies alive. Ms. Juarez from Child Services stepped closer to the quintuplets, who remained clustered around Carolina, Ira, and Ford. Girls, can you tell me your names? I'm Destiny, said the most serious of the 5. I'm Poppy, announced the outspoken one. Dylan, added the careful one. I'm Harlow, said one of the twins. And I'm Veda, finished the other twin. And who takes care of you? Mommy does, they answered in unison. What about Uncle Ford and Grandpa Ira? Ms. Juarez asked gently. They help Mommy, Destiny explained. Uncle Ford reads us stories and Grandpa Ira teaches us about numbers and science. Do you go to school? We have tutors, Dylan said proudly. Mommy says we're too advanced for regular kindergarten. Ms. Juarez made notes on her tablet. The children were clearly well-educated, well-mannered, and emotionally secure. Their clothes were expensive but practical, their health appeared excellent, and they showed no signs of neglect or abuse. Ma'am, she said to Carolina, I'll need to see documentation of their medical care, education, and living arrangements. Of course. Carolina reached into her purse and produced a thick folder. Medical records, educational assessments, psychological evaluations, and photos of our home in Connecticut. Everything is in order. As Ms. Juarez reviewed the documents, Detective Harden turned his attention to the adults. Given the circumstances, I'm going to need statements from everyone involved. That means you, Mr. Ramos, Mrs. Lim, Miss Mathis, and anyone else with direct involvement in this situation. How long will that take? Gustavo asked. As long as it takes to ensure these children's welfare and determine if any laws were broken, the detective replied. I suggest everyone find somewhere comfortable to wait. The wedding coordinator, who had been hovering nervously throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. The bridal suite and groom suite are available, and we have several private dining rooms if people need space to talk. Good, Detective Harden nodded. Let's use the main building. Everyone stays on the property until we're finished. As the crowd began to disperse, many guests simply leaving despite the detective's request, the core group found themselves trapped together by circumstances and legal necessity. Carolina led her daughters toward the main building, followed by Ira and Ford. Gustavo found himself walking beside them, stealing glances at the children who shared his DNA but remained strangers to him. Mommy, Veda whispered loudly, why is that man staring at us? Because he's your father, sweetheart. He's just trying to get to know you. Can we get to know him too? Harlow asked with innocent curiosity. Carolina looked at Gustavo, a silent question in her eyes. Despite everything that had happened between them, she wouldn't deny her children the chance to know their father if they wanted to. Would you like that? Gustavo asked softly, kneeling down to the girl's eye level for the first time. 5 pairs of hazel eyes studied him with the frank assessment only children could manage. You're really tall, Poppy observed. You look sad, Destiny added with concern. Are you sad because you missed our birthday party last week? Dylan asked. Gustavo's heart clenched. You had a birthday party? We turned 6, Harlow explained patiently. Mommy made us a castle cake with 5 towers. 1 tower for each of us, Veda finished. I didn't know, Gustavo admitted, his voice rough with emotion. That's okay, Destiny said kindly. You can come to our next birthday if you want. We won't be 7 for a whole year, though. The simple offer of forgiveness from a 6-year-old nearly broke Gustavo's composure completely. Meanwhile, Miranda had been escorted to a separate room where she sat surrounded by her bridesmaids, all frantically calling their respective social media managers to control the narrative of what would undoubtedly become the most talked-about wedding disaster in Hampton's history. We can salvage this, her maid of honor, Dallas Bailey, insisted. We'll say it was all planned. A surprise family reunion. Very emotional and touching. With what story? Miranda snapped. That my husband-to-be already has a wife and 5 secret children? That he abandoned them 6 years ago? That sounds romantic to you. We'll think of something, Dallas replied weakly. But even she knew this was beyond salvage. The photos and videos were already circulating online. The hashtags were trending. And the narrative being shared wasn't about Miranda's dream wedding, but about Carolina's incredible transformation and the shocking family reunion. Back in the main dining room, Carolina had settled her daughters at a large table with coloring books and juice boxes that the accommodating staff had quickly provided. Ira and Ford flanked the group protectively while Gustavo sat across the table, still trying to process the reality of his children. They're so calm, he marveled, watching them color peacefully despite the chaos of the afternoon. Children adapt when they feel secure, Ford explained. Carolina's given them that security from day one. Tell me about them, Gustavo said suddenly. Tell me everything. Their personalities, their interests, what they're good at, what they struggle with. I want to know. Carolina looked surprised by the genuine request, but began to share. Destiny is our little philosopher. She asks the deepest questions about life and fairness and why things happen the way they do. She's also incredibly empathetic. Poppy is our debater, she continued with a smile. She'll argue with anyone about anything, but she's also fiercely loyal to her sisters. She's the one who speaks up when any of them are upset. Dylan follows rules to the letter, but she's also the most creative. She writes stories and draws pictures for everyone. She remembers every detail of everything we do together. Harlow and Veda are technically fraternal twins, but they might as well share a brain. They finish each other's sentences, wake up at the same time, and have identical preferences for everything. They're also our little comedians. As Carolina spoke, Gustavo watched his daughters with growing amazement. These weren't abstract concepts anymore. These were 5 individual little people with personalities, preferences, and potential he'd never had the chance to nurture. What do they know about me? He asked quietly. The truth, Carolina replied simply. That their father wasn't ready to be a parent when they were born, but that someday he might want to meet them. And they're okay with that? Children are remarkably forgiving when they feel loved and secure. They've never lacked for father figures. She glanced meaningfully at Ira and Ford. But they've always been curious about their biological father. Ms. Juarez approached the table with her completed assessment. Mrs. Lim, your documentation is impeccable. The children are clearly thriving in your care. I see no reason for any intervention from our department. Relief flooded Carolina's face. Thank you. However, Ms. Juarez continued, given that Mr. Ramos is the biological father and there's no custody agreement in place, I do recommend you work with family court to establish formal arrangements. It protects everyone involved. Of course, Carolina agreed. Detective Hardin joined them with his own conclusions. I've spoken with witnesses and reviewed the situation. No laws were broken today. Mrs. Lim had every right to bring her children to meet their father, regardless of the timing. Miss Mathis has no legal standing to file charges. So we're free to go? Carolina asked. You're free to go. But given the complexity of the situation, I'd recommend you all work with legal counsel to sort out the custody and marital status issues before someone makes a decision they'll regret. As if summoned by his words, Joaquin Sherman approached with more legal documents. Gustavo, we need to discuss your options. The marriage situation, potential custody arrangements, and the impact on your assets. But Gustavo was no longer thinking about assets or legal complications. He was watching Destiny help Veda color inside the lines, and Poppy show Harlow how to make her crayon stroke smoother, and Dylan quietly working on what appeared to be a detailed drawing of the golden Ferrari. For the first time in 6 years, he was thinking about what really mattered. The late afternoon sun streamed through tall windows as Carolina sat across from Gustavo in the intimate dining room, their daughters playing quietly nearby under Ford's watchful supervision. Detective Hardin had completed his interviews, Ms. Juarez had filed her report, and the remaining wedding guests had finally been allowed to leave. Only the core family remained, trapped by legal necessity and emotional gravity. I need to understand, Gustavo said quietly, his voice heavy with 6 years of unanswered questions. How did you survive? 5 babies, no money, no support. How did you build an empire from nothing? Carolina studied his face, searching for genuine interest rather than mere curiosity. What she saw there surprised her, authentic regret and a desperate need to comprehend the magnitude of what he'd lost. It started with a gas station bathroom, she began, her voice steady despite the painful memories. February 20th, 2018. 6 days after you threw me out. I was living in my Honda Civic, parked behind a 24-hour diner in Queens, when the morning sickness hit so hard I could barely drive. She paused, watching her daughters color peacefully, their existence a miracle she still marveled at daily. I took the pregnancy test in that bathroom because I couldn't afford to go to a doctor. When I saw the positive result, I sat on that dirty floor and cried for 2 hours. Not because I didn't want children, but because I had no idea how I was going to keep them alive. Gustavo winced, the image of Carolina alone and scared cutting through him like a blade. Where did you go? He asked. Everywhere and nowhere. I tried staying at women's shelters, but the waiting lists were months long. I slept in my car in hospital parking lots because they felt safer than the street. I ate 1 meal a day and told myself the baby would be fine as long as I took the prenatal vitamins I bought with spare change. Ira Goodman, who had been listening silently from across the room, approached the table. May I tell him the rest, my dear? Some memories are too painful for you to relive again. Carolina nodded gratefully, reaching for Ira's weathered hand. I found Carolina on March 15, 2018, Ira continued, settling into a chair beside them. She had collapsed outside the public library in Stamford, Connecticut. Dehydration and malnutrition at 3 months pregnant. You were homeless for a month? Gustavo's voice cracked with horror. 23 days, Carolina corrected quietly. But who's counting? Ira's expression hardened as he looked at Gustavo. When I found her, she weighed 98 pounds and hadn't eaten in 2 days. She was trying to use the library's computers to apply for jobs, but every application required a permanent address she didn't have. Why didn't you call someone? Family, friends, anyone. Who would I call? Carolina's laugh held no humor. My parents died when I was 22. My only sister had stolen my husband. My friends were really your friends, and they'd all chosen sides when you announced I was being replaced." The simple statement hit Gustavo like a physical blow. He'd never considered that divorcing Carolina meant she'd lose their entire social circle along with him. "So what happened?" he asked Ira. "I took her to the hospital first, then to my home," Ira replied. "My wife had passed away the year before, and the house felt too empty. Carolina needed help, and I needed purpose. It worked out perfectly." "Tell him about the ultrasound," Ford interjected from where he was helping Harlow with her drawing. Carolina's face lit up with a bittersweet smile. April 10, 2018. "My first prenatal appointment that I could actually afford, thanks to Ira." The technician kept moving the wand around, frowning at the screen. Then she called in the doctor. "Quintuplets," Ira announced proudly. 5 healthy heartbeats, all developing perfectly despite the rough first trimester. Gustavo's eyes widened. 5 babies. The risks alone were astronomical, Carolina confirmed. The doctors wanted to discuss selective reduction to improve the survival odds of the remaining babies. I refused. These children were already mine, all 5 of them, and I wasn't giving up a single one. That decision nearly killed her, Ira added solemnly. She spent 4 months on strict bed rest. Complete activity restriction. I had to carry her to the bathroom. "But you said she lived in her car during the pregnancy," Gustavo said, confused. "That was later," Carolina explained. "Ira took care of me beautifully until month 6. Then the medical bills started piling up. Even with insurance, the costs of a high-risk quintuplet pregnancy were overwhelming. I couldn't let him lose his house because of my medical expenses. So she moved into her car in the hospital parking lot," Ford said, his voice tight with controlled anger. 32 weeks pregnant with 5 babies, sleeping in a Honda Civic so she could be close to the hospital when labor started. "The night shift security guards knew me by name," Carolina added with dark humor. "They'd bring me coffee and check on me every few hours. Good people, all of them." Gustavo buried his face in his hands. "Carolina, I had no idea. If I'd known." "You'd have what?" she asked sharply. "Come back. Apologized. Helped raise the children you said I was too old and infertile to give you." "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "I was a different person then. Selfish, shallow, focused on all the wrong things." "Yes, you were," Carolina agreed without malice. "But I didn't have the luxury of being selfish. I had 5 lives depending on me." "Tell him about the birth," Adilyn called out from her coloring station, apparently listening despite appearing focused on her artwork. "You know this story, sweetheart," Carolina said with surprise. "But he doesn't," Adilyn replied matter-of-factly. "And it's a good story." Carolina smiled at her daughter's logic. August 20th, 2018. I went into labor at 4 a.m. in the hospital parking lot. Early, even for quintuplets. The contractions hit so fast and hard I could barely reach the emergency button I'd installed in my car. "Emergency button?" Gustavo asked. "Ira's idea," she explained. "A direct line to the maternity ward." When I pressed it, they had a team waiting for me by the time I staggered through the doors. 5 girls, born within 18 minutes, Ira continued the story. Destiny first, then Poppy, Adilyn, Harlow, and finally little Veda. Each one fighting for life with their mother's determination. "They were so tiny," Carolina whispered, lost in the memory. 2 pounds each, maybe less. Translucent skin, barely breathing on their own. But so beautiful, so perfect. "How long in the NICU?" Gustavo asked. 14 weeks. 98 days of watching my babies fight for every breath, every ounce of weight gain, every developmental milestone. I lived in that hospital, sleeping in waiting room chairs, eating from vending machines. "And building your first business," Ford added with pride. "Business?" Gustavo looked confused. Carolina's expression shifted, the pain of memory replaced by the satisfaction of triumph. I had a lot of time to think during those hospital vigils. I watched the NICU staff struggle with outdated systems, inefficient processes, communication breakdowns that could have killed my babies. So she designed a better system, Ira explained. A comprehensive patient management software specifically for neonatal intensive care. Better monitoring, improved communication between shifts, predictive analytics for potential complications. I wrote the initial code on library computers during the few hours each day when I couldn't be with the babies, Carolina continued. By the time the girls came home, I had a working prototype. And your first client? Gustavo asked, genuinely fascinated. The hospital where my daughters were born. They saw the difference it could make and agreed to test it. Within 6 months, we'd reduced patient complications by 30% and improved staff efficiency by 40%. The word spread quickly through the medical community, Ford added. Hospitals across the country wanted the system. Within 2 years, Carolina's company was processing data for over 200 NICUs nationwide. But how did you fund the expansion? Starting a tech company requires significant capital. That's where I came in again, Ira smiled. I'd spent 40 years building a construction empire before I retired. I recognized genius when I saw it, and Carolina had something special. I invested everything I had in her vision. And Ford? Gustavo asked, looking at the younger man with obvious curiosity and perhaps a hint of jealousy. I was working for a competing software company when I first encountered Carolina's system, Ford explained. It was so superior to anything else on the market that I quit my job and asked if she needed help. That was 4 years ago. He's being modest, Carolina interjected. Ford revolutionized our architecture and helped us expand into general hospital management systems. He's the reason we went from a small NICU company to a comprehensive healthcare technology empire. Empire. Gustavo repeated. LimTech Solutions, Carolina announced proudly. We now provide software solutions to over 3,000 hospitals worldwide. Last year's revenue was $2.8 billion. The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. Gustavo, whose own inherited wealth totaled perhaps $50 million, struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what Carolina had built. $2.8 billion, he whispered. With a B, Poppy called out cheerfully from her coloring station. Mommy teaches us about numbers. We're going to be business ladies like her when we grow up. The Ferrari was a celebration purchase, Carolina explained. When we signed our largest contract last month, $100 million seemed appropriate for a company that started in a hospital parking lot. Gustavo sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything he'd learned. The woman he'd abandoned as worthless had built a global empire. The children he'd never known existed were brilliant, confident, and loved. The life he'd thrown away had continued without him and achieved more than he'd ever dreamed possible. I don't understand, he finally said. Why come back now? Why show up at my wedding? You didn't need me. You obviously don't need anything from me. Carolina looked at her daughters, all 5 absorbed in their activities but clearly listening to every word. Because they asked, she said simply. Last month, for the first time, they started asking serious questions about their father. Not just casual curiosity, but real questions. Who he was, why he wasn't part of their lives, whether he might want to meet them someday. And what did you tell them? The truth. That their father made a mistake and wasn't ready to be a parent when they were born, but that people can change and grow. I told them that if they wanted to meet him, I'd make it happen. So you tracked down our wedding? Public records, social media, wedding announcements. It wasn't difficult to find information about Gustavo Ramos marrying Miranda Mathis in the Hamptons. Carolina's tone remained neutral. The timing was coincidental, but perhaps fitting. A day meant to celebrate new beginnings seemed appropriate for introductions. You could have called, written a letter, arranged a private meeting. I could have, Carolina agreed. But I wanted you to see them in context. Not as an obligation or a burden, but as they really are. Confident, intelligent, beloved children who didn't need you but might want to know you. And now? Gustavo asked quietly. Now that's up to you, Carolina replied. They've met their father. The mystery is solved. Whether you want to be part of their lives going forward is your choice to make. She stood gracefully, gathering her purse and signaling to the girls that their impromptu visit was coming to an end. Girls, time to go. Say goodbye to your father. 5 little voices chorused, Goodbye, Daddy, with the casual politeness of children who might or might not see him again, their future entirely dependent on choices made by adults they barely knew. As they prepared to leave, Gustavo realized he was at the most important crossroads of his life. Behind him lay 6 years of mistakes and missed opportunities. Ahead lay the possibility of redemption, but only if he was brave enough to choose it. Wait, Gustavo called out as Carolina began leading the quintuplets toward the golden Ferrari. His voice carried a desperation he didn't try to hide. Please, don't go yet. Carolina paused, her hand resting protectively on Destiny's shoulder. Gustavo, it's been a long day for everyone. The girls need dinner and... Have dinner with me, he interrupted, then caught himself. I mean all of you. Here. The restaurant is still set up from the reception that never happened. Please. The quintuplets looked up at their mother with identical expressions of curiosity. They'd been remarkably patient throughout the day's chaos, but their 6-year-old attention spans were beginning to fray. Can we, Mommy? Poppy asked. I'm hungry, and the man with the fancy uniform said they have chicken nuggets. Carolina glanced at Ford and Ira, seeking their input. Ford shrugged. It's your call. But the girls should eat soon. And it might be good for them to spend time with their father in a normal setting, Ira added quietly. Less dramatic than today's introduction. All right, Carolina decided. But just dinner. Then we're driving back to Connecticut tonight. Relief flooded Gustavo's face. Thank you. I'll arrange everything. 20 minutes later, they were seated at a round table on the restaurant's outdoor terrace, overlooking the manicured gardens where the wedding ceremony had taken place hours earlier. The abandoned altar had been cleared away, but rose petals still dotted the grass like confetti from a celebration that never happened. The quintuplets had arranged themselves strategically around the table. Destiny and Adilyn flanking Carolina, Poppy and Veda between Ford and Ira, and little Harlow sitting beside Gustavo, studying him with frank curiosity. You have the same chin as us, Harlow observed, tilting her head. But your hair is different. My hair used to be darker when I was younger, Gustavo replied, unconsciously running a hand through his salt and pepper locks. It changes color as you get older. Will our hair change colors too? Veda asked from across the table. Maybe a little, when you're much older. But not for many, many years. Good, Poppy declared. I like my hair the way it is. The server appeared with children's menus and crayons, though the girls seemed more interested in their father than in coloring. Their questions came in rapid succession, delivered with the innocent directness that only children possessed. Why didn't you come to our birthday party? Adilyn asked. Because I didn't know when your birthday was, Gustavo answered honestly. It's August 20th, Destiny informed him solemnly. We're Leo babies. Mommy says Leos are brave and strong. August 20th, Gustavo repeated, committing the date to memory. I'll remember that now. What's your favorite color? Harlow continued her interrogation. Blue, I think. What's yours? Purple. And pink. And sometimes yellow when I'm happy. What makes you happy? Gustavo asked, genuinely curious. Pancakes, Harlow replied immediately. And when Mommy reads us stories. And when Uncle Ford plays airplane with us. And ice cream. Ice cream makes everyone happy, Gustavo agreed with a smile. As the conversation continued, Carolina found herself watching Gustavo interact with their daughters with growing amazement. The man who had abandoned her for being too old and infertile was patiently answering endless questions from 5-6-year-olds, his face lighting up with each new discovery about their personalities. "Do you live in a big house?" Veda asked. "Pretty big," Gustavo replied. "But not as big as yours, I bet." "Our house has a library with a rolling ladder," Poppy announced proudly. "And a pool with a slide. And each of us has our own room, but we usually all sleep in Destiny's room anyway." "Why Destiny's room?" "Because she has the best night light," Adilyn explained. "It makes stars on the ceiling." "That sounds wonderful," Gustavo said, and meant it. The server returned to take their orders. The girls ordered with impressive politeness, each saying, "please," and "thank you," without prompting. Their manners were impeccable, clearly the result of careful training. "You've raised them beautifully," Gustavo said quietly to Carolina once the server had left. "We've raised them beautifully," Carolina corrected, gesturing to include Ford and Ira. "It takes a village." "I want to be part of that village," Gustavo said suddenly, surprising everyone including himself. "I know I have no right to ask, and I know I don't deserve it, but I want to be their father. Really be their father, not just the man whose DNA they share." Ford leaned forward, his protective instincts engaged. "That's a big statement, Gustavo. Being a father isn't something you do part-time when it's convenient." "I know that now," Gustavo replied. "I didn't understand it 6 years ago, but I do now." "Understanding and doing are different things," Ira interjected gently. "These girls have structure, stability, routine. They've never known disappointment from a parent figure because Carolina has never let them down. If you want to be part of their lives, you need to be reliable. Always." "I can be reliable," Gustavo insisted. "Can you?" Carolina asked skeptically. "You've built your entire adult life around convenience and personal pleasure. When Miranda wanted something, you gave it to her. When I needed something, you threw me away. What happens when being a father becomes inconvenient?" The harsh truth of her words stung, but Gustavo didn't flinch. "Then I'll learn to put someone else's needs first. I'll learn to be the man these girls deserve." "Learning takes time," Ford pointed out. "And children don't wait for adults to figure things out. They need consistency now, not eventually." "So teach me," Gustavo said, looking directly at Carolina. "I know you don't owe me anything, but teach me how to be their father. I'll do whatever it takes." Before Carolina could respond, Destiny's small voice cut through the adult conversation. "Daddy," she said tentatively, trying out the word. "Why did you leave Mommy when we were in her tummy?" The question silenced the table. Even the other girls stopped their chatter to listen, sensing the importance of the moment. Gustavo looked at his eldest daughter, her serious hazel eyes so much like his own, and made the choice to tell her the truth. "Because I was scared," he said simply. "I thought I wanted children, but when the time came, I got frightened and made a terrible mistake. I left because I was a coward, not because of anything you or your mommy did wrong." "But you're not scared anymore?" Poppy asked. "I'm still scared," Gustavo admitted. "But now I'm more scared of missing out on knowing all of you than I am of being a father." "Good," Adilyn declared with 6-year-old wisdom. "Mommy says being scared is okay as long as you do the right thing anyway." The food arrived, providing a welcome break from the emotional intensity. The girls chattered about school, their tutors, their upcoming dance recital, and their individual interests. Gustavo listened with fascination, learning that Destiny loved books about space. Poppy wanted to be a lawyer, Adilyn wrote poetry, and the twins Harlow and Veda were obsessed with marine biology. "We're going to study dolphins," Harlow explained between bites of chicken. "Uncle Ford is taking us to the aquarium in Mystic next weekend," That sounds educational, Gustavo said, then hesitated. Could I? Would it be possible for me to come along? If that's okay with everyone. The girls looked at their mother expectantly. Carolina chewed slowly, considering. It would mean a 4-hour drive each way, she said finally. And the girls get car sick sometimes. And Veda has a tendency to wander off in crowded places. And Poppy asks approximately 3,000 questions per hour. I can handle questions and car sickness, Gustavo replied. And I'll help watch Veda. You don't know what you're volunteering for, Ford warned with a slight smile. A day out with all 5 of them is like herding cats. Brilliant, energetic, opinionated cats. I want to learn, Gustavo said firmly. I want to know what their favorite exhibits are, what makes them laugh, what frightens them. I want to be the person they think of when they need help or comfort or someone to share good news with. That's Uncle Ford and Grandpa Ira, Veda pointed out matter-of-factly. I know, Gustavo said. And I'm grateful they've been there for you. But maybe there's room for one more person who loves you. The girls exchanged glances in that mysterious way children communicate without words. We could try it, Destiny said carefully. But you have to promise not to disappear again. I promise, Gustavo said solemnly. I will never disappear from your lives again. What about Aunt Miranda? Dylan asked. She seemed very angry at us. Gustavo's jaw tightened. Miranda is not part of my life anymore. She said terrible things about you today, and I will never forgive that. You are my daughters, and anyone who can't love you doesn't deserve to be in my life. But you were going to marry her, Poppy pointed out with devastating logic. I was going to make another terrible mistake, Gustavo admitted. But you stopped me from doing that. You saved me from ruining my life again. As dinner wound down, the conversations became more personal. Gustavo learned about bedtime routines, favorite books, food preferences, and the complex social dynamics of 5 sisters who shared everything but maintained distinct identities. Destiny reads to us every night, Harlow explained. She's the best reader. And Poppy protects us if anyone is mean, Veda added. She's very fierce. Dylan makes up songs about everything, Destiny continued. She made one about our goldfish that made Mommy cry happy tears. Harlow and Veda always share everything, Poppy finished. Even if there's only one cookie left, they break it in half. Watching his daughters talk about each other with such love and loyalty, Gustavo felt a profound shift in his understanding of family. These weren't just his biological children. They were a complete unit, a functioning family system that had thrived without him. I have a confession, he said as they prepared to leave. I don't know how to be a father to 5 children. I don't know the rules or the routines or what to do when someone gets hurt or scared. That's okay, Destiny said kindly. We can teach you. We're very good teachers. We taught Uncle Ford how to braid hair, Dylan added helpfully. And we taught Grandpa Ira how to play video games, Poppy continued. Teaching Daddy how to be a daddy will be easy, Harlow declared with absolute confidence. As they walked toward the parking area, Gustavo felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the shallow optimism of a business deal or the temporary excitement of a new romance, but the deep, abiding hope that came from finally understanding what truly mattered. His daughters skipped ahead, their energy restored by food and the novelty of having a father to show off to. Carolina walked beside him in comfortable silence, her protective instincts still alert but no longer defensive. Thank you, he said quietly, for giving me this chance, for raising them so beautifully, for being stronger than I ever imagined possible. Don't thank me yet, Carolina replied. Being their father isn't going to be easy. They're wonderful children, but they're also strong-willed, demanding, and completely unimpressed by wealth or status. They'll judge you by your actions, not your promises. Good, Gustavo said, meaning it completely. I want them to have high standards. I want them to expect the best from the people in their lives. Then don't let them down, Carolina said simply. As they reached the golden Ferrari, the quintuplets gathered around their mother for goodbye hugs and kisses. But for the first time, they also approached Gustavo. Goodbye, Daddy, Destiny said formally, offering her hand for a shake. Goodbye, sweetheart, Gustavo replied, accepting the handshake with appropriate seriousness. One by one, each daughter said goodbye, their farewells ranging from Poppy's enthusiastic hug to Adilyn's careful wave. When it was over, Gustavo stood alone in the gathering dusk, watching the taillights of the Ferrari disappear down the long driveway. For the first time in 6 years, he felt like he might be on the right path. 1 week had passed since the wedding that never happened, and Gustavo's world had become unrecognizable. His Southampton mansion, once a symbol of his success and bachelor lifestyle, now felt hollow and pretentious. Empty rooms that had once showcased expensive art and furniture now seemed like monuments to a shallow existence. He stood in his home office, staring at the framed photos covering his desk. Pictures of him and Miranda at various society events, all smiles and designer clothes, looked foreign to him now. In contrast, a single printed photo from his phone sat prominently in the center. The quintuplets at dinner last Sunday, their faces animated as they explained their favorite sea creatures to him. His phone buzzed with another text from Miranda. We need to talk. This isn't over. Gustavo deleted the message without reading it fully. Miranda had been relentless all week, alternating between threats, manipulation, and promises to forgive him if he'd just come to his senses. She'd even had her lawyer contact his, claiming breach of promise and demanding compensation for the ruined wedding. But none of that mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was the aquarium trip planned for today. His first real outing as a father. The drive to Carolina's Connecticut estate took exactly 90 minutes, giving Gustavo time to rehearse conversations with his daughters and second-guess every decision he'd made since last Sunday. He'd bought books about child development, researched appropriate gifts for 6-year-olds, and even practiced braiding hair on a mannequin head his bewildered housekeeper had purchased for him. Carolina's home, when he finally arrived, exceeded even his elevated expectations. The modern glass and steel structure sat on 50 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds, with a circular driveway leading to an entrance that managed to be both impressive and welcoming. This wasn't just wealth, it was wealth with purpose and taste. Daddy's here! Poppy's voice rang out before he'd even parked his Bentley. All 5 girls came running from the house, their excitement genuine and infectious. We've been ready for an hour, Destiny announced, adjusting the small backpack on her shoulders. Mommy packed snacks and coloring books and motion sickness medicine. Motion sickness medicine? Gustavo asked with concern. Just in case, Carolina said, appearing behind the girls with Ford and Ira. Harlow sometimes gets car sick on long drives. I brought a bigger car, Gustavo offered, gesturing to his spacious Bentley SUV. More room to spread out. That's thoughtful, Carolina acknowledged. The car seats are already installed. As they transferred the elaborate car seat system from Carolina's vehicle to his, Gustavo marveled at the complexity of traveling with 5 children. Booster seats, entertainment systems, snack containers, first aid kits, change of clothes for each child, and enough backup supplies to handle any conceivable emergency. This is more equipment than I took on business trips to Europe, he muttered, struggling with the safety harness on Veda's seat. Welcome to parenthood, Ford said with amusement, easily adjusting the straps Gustavo had tangled. Everything takes 3 times longer and requires twice as much planning. But it's worth it, Ira added, watching the girls excitedly discuss which exhibits they wanted to see first. Every moment of chaos is worth it. 20 minutes later, they were finally loaded and ready to depart. Carolina climbed into the passenger seat while Ford and Ira followed in Carolina's Tesla. The girls filled the back 2 rows, their chatter creating a symphony of excitement and anticipation. The first hour of the drive went smoothly. The girls sang songs, played games, and bombarded Gustavo with questions about his childhood, his favorite animals, and whether he'd ever been to an aquarium before. "I went to the one in Boston when I was about your age," he told them. "But that was a very long time ago." "Were there dolphins then?" Harlow asked seriously. "Yes, sweetheart. Dolphins have been around much longer than people." "Good," Veda declared. "Because dolphins are the smartest animals in the ocean." "Actually," Adilin corrected gently, "octopuses might be smarter. They can solve puzzles and open jars and change colors." "But dolphins save people," Poppy argued. "That's smarter than opening jars." The debate continued good-naturedly until they stopped for gas in New Haven. That's when everything went wrong. As Gustavo pumped gas, his phone rang. Miranda's face appeared on the screen, but before he could decline the call, Destiny's curious voice piped up from the back seat. "Daddy, who's that lady on your phone?" "She's pretty." Carolina, who had been checking messages on her own phone, looked up sharply. Her expression hardened when she saw Miranda's photo still displayed on Gustavo's screen. "Why do you still have pictures of her in your phone?" Carolina asked, her voice carefully controlled. "I haven't had time to delete them," Gustavo replied, declining the call quickly. "It's not important." "Not important." Carolina's tone grew cold. "The woman you were going to marry a week ago isn't important enough to delete from your phone?" The girls, sensing tension, grew quiet in the back seat. Their excited chatter died away as they watched their parents with confused concern. "Carolina, it doesn't mean anything," Gustavo insisted. "I just haven't cleaned out my phone yet." "Haven't had time?" Carolina's laugh held no humor. "You've had 7 days. How long does it take to delete a contact?" "You're right," Gustavo admitted, fumbling with his phone. "I'll do it right now." But as he tried to delete Miranda's information, the phone rang again. This time, Miranda's voice filled the car through the Bluetooth system before Gustavo could stop it. "Gustavo, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all week. We need to talk about this ridiculous situation. I'm willing to forgive you for your temporary insanity, but we need to handle this properly." "Miranda, I can't talk right now," Gustavo said desperately, trying to disconnect the call. "Who is this Miranda person?" Poppy demanded from the back seat. "And why is she talking to our daddy?" "She's the lady from the wedding," Destiny explained quietly. "The one who called us mean names." "Is that little Charlotte?" Miranda's voice continued through the speakers, dripping with false sweetness. "How precious." "Gustavo, surely you realize this whole charade has gone far enough. These children aren't really yours, and even if they were, you can't possibly think your father material." The car fell silent except for Miranda's voice continuing to poison the air. "I've spoken to my lawyers, and we can make this whole problem disappear. A nice settlement for the woman, boarding schools for the children, and we can get back to our real life together." Carolina's face had gone white with rage. "Turn it off," she said quietly. "I'm trying," Gustavo said frantically, stabbing at his phone. "Turn it off now." Carolina's voice rose to a shout that made all 5 girls jump. Finally, the call disconnected, leaving a terrible silence in its wake. "Mommy!" Veda's small voice trembled with confusion. "Why did that lady say we aren't really Daddy's children? And what did she mean about making us disappear?" Harlow added, tears starting to form in her eyes. Carolina turned in her seat to face her daughters, her maternal instincts overriding her anger. "Girls, that woman is confused and saying hurtful things. You are absolutely your father's children, and nobody is going anywhere." But the damage was done. The excitement and joy of their family outing had been shattered by Miranda's cruelty and Gustavo's failure to protect them from it. "I want to go home," Adilin said quietly. "I don't want to go to the aquarium anymore." "Me too," agreed Destiny. "My stomach feels sick." "Mine too," chorused the other 3. Carolina looked at Gustavo with disappointment so profound it felt like a physical blow. "Start the car," she said coldly. We're going home. Carolina, please. Let me explain. Miranda doesn't speak for me. I don't want her back. I would never send the girls away. Start the car, Gustavo. But the aquarium. The dolphins. They were so excited. They're not excited anymore, Carolina said flatly. They're hurt and confused and scared. Thanks to your ex-fiancé and your inability to set proper boundaries. As Gustavo pulled back onto the highway, heading toward Connecticut instead of Mystic, the girls remained unusually quiet. Their questions, when they came, were whispered and heartbreaking. Daddy, Destiny asked softly, do you want to send us to boarding school? No, sweetheart. Never. I want you to stay exactly where you are, happy and loved. But that lady said you did, Poppy pointed out with devastating logic. That lady is wrong about everything, Gustavo replied firmly. I don't love her. I don't want to marry her. And I would never, ever send you away. Then why didn't you tell her that? Dylan asked. When she was saying mean things about us, why didn't you stop her? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Why hadn't he stopped Miranda immediately? Why had he allowed her voice to fill the car with poison directed at his children? I should have, he admitted quietly. I should have protected you from hearing those things. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't fix it, Carolina said coldly from the passenger seat. Sorry doesn't erase what they heard. The rest of the drive passed in oppressive silence. The girls dozed fitfully, exhausted by emotional stress. Carolina stared out the window, her body language radiating disappointment and anger. Gustavo drove mechanically, replaying the disaster over and over in his mind. When they finally reached Carolina's estate, the girls climbed out of the car with none of their earlier enthusiasm. They hugged their mother tightly, seeking comfort and reassurance. Girls, go inside with Uncle Ford and Grandpa Ira, Carolina instructed gently. I need to talk to your father privately. As soon as the children were out of earshot, Carolina turned on Gustavo with fury that had been building for 2 hours. How dare you, she said, her voice shaking with controlled rage. How dare you expose my children to that woman's venom? It was an accident, Gustavo protested. I didn't mean for them to hear any of that. An accident? Carolina's laugh was bitter. You still have her photos in your phone. You still take her calls. You're still emotionally available to a woman who wants to destroy your children's lives. That's not an accident. That's a choice. I'm not emotionally available to Miranda. I hate her for what she said today. But you didn't hate her enough to delete her number. You didn't hate her enough to block her calls. You didn't hate her enough to protect your daughters from her poison. I will now, Gustavo said desperately. I'll delete everything. I'll block her completely. I'll get a restraining order if necessary. It's too late, Carolina said quietly, and her calm was more frightening than her anger had been. Those children trusted you. They let you into their hearts, and you failed them at the first real test. Give me another chance. Please. I'll do better. Better. Carolina shook her head. Gustavo, this wasn't a mistake. This was a revelation. When push came to shove, when your children needed you to choose between them and your past, you hesitated. You let Miranda's voice fill their world with cruelty while you fumbled with a phone you should have cleaned out days ago. I choose them, Gustavo said urgently. I choose my daughters. I choose you. I choose this family. You're 6 years too late, Carolina replied, turning toward her house. And today proved that you're still not ready to be the father they deserve. As she walked away, Gustavo called after her desperately. What can I do? How can I fix this? Carolina paused at her front door, not turning around. You can't fix this, Gustavo. Some things, once broken, stay broken. My daughter's trust is one of them. The door closed behind her with the finality of a coffin lid, leaving Gustavo alone in the gathering darkness, the ruins of his second chance scattered around him like the abandoned rose petals from his wedding that never was. Inside the house, 5 little girls asked their mother if their daddy was ever coming back. And for the first time since their birth, Carolina couldn't give them a reassuring answer. 1 week had passed since the disastrous aquarium trip, and Gustavo sat in his car outside Carolina's estate gates, unable to summon the courage to press the intercom button. This had become his routine, driving the 90 minutes from Southampton every morning, sitting in his car for hours, watching glimpses of his daughters playing in the distance, then driving home without making contact. Security cameras had surely spotted him by now, but no one had asked him to leave. Perhaps Carolina was allowing him these pathetic vigils out of pity, or perhaps she simply didn't care enough to acknowledge his presence. Through the wrought iron gates, he could see the quintuplets in their matching pink coats, building something elaborate in the sandbox under Ford's supervision. Their laughter carried on the autumn breeze, a sound that simultaneously filled his heart and broke it. His phone buzzed with a text from his lawyer, Miranda's harassment suit dismissed. Judge called it frivolous. She's also been served with restraining order as requested. Too little, too late. Gustavo had spent the week systematically erasing every trace of Miranda from his life. Phone numbers blocked, photos deleted, mutual friends informed that any contact would result in legal action. He'd even hired a private investigator to document her attempts to contact him, building a case for stalking charges if necessary. But none of it mattered. The damage was done. His daughters had heard Miranda's poison, and he'd failed to protect them from it. Another text arrived, this one from Ira Goodman. Meet me at Starbucks on Route 7 in Wilton. 1 hour. Come alone. Gustavo stared at the message, hope and dread warring in his chest. Ira hadn't spoken to him since the failed aquarium trip, though Ford had called twice to deliver brutal but fair assessments of his failures as a father. 45 minutes later, Gustavo sat across from Ira in a corner booth, 2 untouched coffee cups between them. The older man studied him with the analytical gaze of someone who'd built an empire by reading people accurately. You look terrible, Ira observed. I feel worse, Gustavo replied honestly. How are the girls? Confused. Hurt. Asking questions their mother can't answer without lying to them. Ira's tone was matter-of-fact, not cruel, which somehow made it worse. What kind of questions? Whether their daddy is coming back. Whether they did something wrong. Whether the mean lady was right about them not being your real children. Ira paused, letting the words sink in. Carolina's been honest with them, but 6-year-olds don't understand adult failures. They personalize everything. Gustavo buried his face in his hands. I never meant for them to hear any of that. I would cut off my own arm before I'd hurt those children. But you did hurt them, Ira pointed out. Intentions don't matter to a 6-year-old who heard someone suggest she should be sent away to boarding school. How do I fix it? That's the wrong question, Ira replied. The right question is, are you capable of being the father they need? Not the father you want to be, not the father you think you should be, but the father they actually need. I don't know, Gustavo admitted. I thought I was ready, but last week proved I'm still making selfish choices. I kept Miranda's contact information because some part of me wasn't ready to fully commit to this new life. At least you're honest about it. Honest doesn't help my daughters. They needed me to choose them completely, and I hesitated. What kind of father does that make me? Ira was quiet for a long moment, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. It makes you human. Flawed, imperfect, learning. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know what I can do. Carolina won't take my calls. The girls probably never want to see me again. I've ruined everything. Have you? Haven't I? Ira pulled out his phone and showed Gustavo a photo. 5 little girls sat around Carolina's kitchen table, each holding a crayon and working on identical drawings. What are they drawing? Gustavo asked. Pictures for you, Ira replied. They've been making them every day this week. Cards, drawings, letters they can't quite write yet but dictate to their mother. All for their daddy. Gustavo's eyes filled with tears. They're still thinking about me? Children forgive more easily than adults, Ira explained. But they also trust more completely. If you break that trust again, there won't be a third chance. So what do I do? You prove you've changed. Not with words, but with actions. Consistent, reliable, selfless actions that put their needs above your comfort every single time. How? Ira leaned forward, his expression intense. You want to be their father? Then act like it. Not when it's convenient, not when it feels good, but every day. Whether they forgive you or not. Whether Carolina ever speaks to you again or not. You show up for those children no matter what. But Carolina won't let me see them. I'm not talking about visitation. I'm talking about being present in their lives in every way you can. You want to know what they need. Security. Stability. The knowledge that their father exists and cares about them even when he's not physically there. Ira pulled out a tablet and showed Gustavo a series of documents. Educational trust funds for each girl. College funds that will grow with compound interest. Medical insurance that covers every possible need. Emergency funds for anything Carolina might require for their care. You want me to buy their forgiveness? I want you to take responsibility, Ira corrected firmly. Those children exist because of choices you made. They're thriving despite choices you made. But they're your daughters, and that comes with obligations whether you ever see them again or not. Gustavo studied the trust fund documents, seeing numbers that represented security and opportunity for his daughters. This is millions of dollars. It's less than you spent on cars last year, Ira pointed out. And significantly less than Carolina spent building her empire to support them when you weren't there. What else? Letters. Not to Carolina, but to each girl individually. Weekly letters about your life, your thoughts, your hopes for their futures. Letters they can read when they're older, so they know their father was thinking about them even when they couldn't be together. And if they never want to read them, then you'll have written them anyway. Being a parent means doing the right thing without guarantee of appreciation or reward. Ira showed him more documents. There's also this. Gustavo looked at legal papers establishing a scholarship fund at 5 different universities, each named for one of his daughters. The Destiny Ramos Scholarship for Future Scientists. The Papi Ramos Fund for Young Advocates. This is what fathers do, Ira explained. They build legacies for their children. They create opportunities. They open doors their children might want to walk through someday. But what about seeing them? What about being part of their daily lives? That's Carolina's choice to make. And frankly, you haven't earned it yet. Ira's tone was gentle but firm. She trusted you with her children's hearts, and you broke that trust. Rebuilding it will take time, consistency, and proof that you've fundamentally changed. How long? However long it takes. Maybe months. Maybe years. Maybe never. But you do it anyway because they're your daughters and you owe them a father who chooses them every single day. Gustavo signed the trust fund documents with shaking hands, each signature representing a commitment larger than any business deal he'd ever made. There's one more thing, Ira said, producing a final document. Custody papers. Not to fight Carolina for the girls, but to formally acknowledge your parental rights and responsibilities. Legal recognition that you are their father and will support them financially and emotionally for the rest of their lives. Even if I never see them again? Especially if you never see them again. Love isn't conditional on proximity, Gustavo. Parenthood isn't conditional on forgiveness. As they left the coffee shop, Ira handed Gustavo a manila envelope. Pictures from this week. Videos of them playing, laughing, learning. Carolina thought you should see them, even if you can't be with them. She's letting me have pictures? She's letting you be their father in the only way she feels safe allowing right now. Don't waste it. That evening, Gustavo sat in his home office, surrounded by legal documents that represented the most important commitments of his life. The trust funds were established. The scholarship foundations were created. The custody papers were filed. He opened the envelope from Ira and spread the photos across his desk. His daughters building sandcastles, reading books, dancing in their backyard, helping their mother cook dinner. A week of their lives he'd missed because of his own failures. Taking out his laptop, Gustavo began typing the first of what would become hundreds of letters to his daughters. Dear Destiny, my brilliant, thoughtful firstborn daughter. Today I want to tell you about the stars because I know you love them, and because when I look at the night sky now, I think about how you light up the world the same way. As he wrote, Gustavo finally understood what Ira had been trying to teach him. Being a father wasn't about being present for the good moments or convenient times. It was about choosing his daughters every single day, whether they knew it or not, whether they forgave him or not, whether he ever earned the right to be called daddy again. It was about love without conditions, commitment without rewards, and hope without guarantees. For the first time in his life, Gustavo was ready to be that kind of father. What would you do if you had to prove your love through actions alone, with no guarantee of forgiveness? How do you rebuild trust once it's been shattered? Exactly 11 months had passed since the disastrous aquarium trip, and Carolina stood in her kitchen, putting the finishing touches on 5 individual birthday cakes. Each cake reflected its recipient's personality: a galaxy cake for Destiny with edible stars, a courthouse cake for Poppy complete with tiny scales of justice, a book-shaped cake for Dylan covered in fondant poems, and matching ocean cakes for Harlow and Veda featuring coral reefs and dolphins. Mommy, are you sure Daddy's coming? Destiny asked for the 10th time that morning, her voice carrying the careful hope of a 7-year-old who had learned that adults sometimes disappointed you. He'll be here, sweetheart, Carolina replied, though her own certainty had been hard-won. Over the past 11 months, Gustavo had done something unprecedented. He'd kept every single promise he'd made. Weekly letters arrived without fail, each one addressed individually to its recipient and filled with stories, encouragement, and unconditional love. The trust funds and scholarship foundations had been established and were growing steadily. Most importantly, he'd shown up for every milestone, even when not invited. School plays, dance recitals, medical appointments, parent-teacher conferences. Gustavo attended them all, sitting quietly in the back, never approaching unless welcomed, but always present. Always there, proving through consistency what words had failed to accomplish. Look! Poppy shouted from the living room window. There's Daddy's car. All 5 girls rushed to the window, pressing their faces against the glass as Gustavo's familiar Bentley pulled through the estate gates. But today, he wasn't alone. Who's that with him? Dylan wondered, pointing at the passenger seat. Carolina joined her daughters at the window, her heart skipping as she recognized Ford Benson climbing out of the driver's side. Gustavo emerged from the passenger seat, his arms filled with carefully wrapped presents. Uncle Ford picked up Daddy? Harlow asked, confused. That's interesting, Carolina murmured, watching the 2 men who had become the most important figures in her daughters' lives walking toward the house together. The doorbell rang, and 5 excited voices chorused, "Come in," before Carolina could reach the door. Gustavo entered first, his appearance noticeably changed from the man who'd abandoned her 6 years ago. His hair was completely silver now, laugh lines had deepened around his eyes, and his expensive suits had been replaced by jeans and a simple blue button-down shirt that made him look approachable rather than intimidating. "Happy birthday, my beautiful girls," he said, kneeling down as all 5 daughters surrounded him for hugs that had become natural and enthusiastic over the months of careful relationship building. "Daddy, why did Uncle Ford drive you here?" Veda asked with characteristic directness. Ford cleared his throat, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "Well, your daddy and I had some things to discuss, and we thought today would be a good day to share some news with all of you." Carolina raised an eyebrow, suddenly nervous. Over the past year, she and Ford had grown closer, their partnership expanding from business to something deeper and more personal. But they'd been careful to keep their relationship private, not wanting to complicate the delicate process of Gustavo rebuilding his relationship with the girls. "What kind of news?" Destiny asked, always the most perceptive of the five. "The good kind," Gustavo said, his voice warm with genuine happiness. "But first, birthday presents and cake. Then we'll talk." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of wrapping paper, delighted squeals, and candle blowing. Gustavo's gifts were perfect: a telescope for Destiny, a complete set of law books for children for Poppy, a leather-bound journal with her name embossed in gold for Dylan, and matching marine biology field guides for the twins. "These are exactly what we wanted," Harlow marveled, clutching her field guide. "How did you know?" Veda added. "Because I pay attention," Gustavo replied simply. "I listen when you talk about your dreams and interests. That's what daddies do." As the girls settled around the table with their individual cakes, Carolina found herself studying Gustavo's face. The man who had once dismissed her as too old and infertile now looked at their daughters with such profound love and pride that it took her breath away. "Okay," Poppy announced, having finished her first slice of cake with characteristic efficiency. "Now tell us the news." Ford and Gustavo exchanged glances, and Ford nodded encouragingly. "Well," Gustavo began, "over the past few months, Uncle Ford and I have been working together on something special. We've been planning ways to make sure your family has everything it needs to be happy and secure." "Are you and Uncle Ford friends now?" Dylan asked. "We are," Gustavo confirmed. "Good friends. In fact, Uncle Ford has taught me more about being a father than anyone else ever could." Ford looked surprised by the acknowledgement. "Gustavo has worked very hard this past year to become the father you girls deserve. I'm proud of the changes he's made. But there's something else," Gustavo continued, his voice growing more serious. "Uncle Ford and I have been talking about what's best for this family, and we've realized something important." He looked directly at Carolina, his expression tender but resolute. "Your mother deserves to be with someone who loves her completely, unconditionally, and puts her happiness above everything else. Someone who sees her strength and brilliance and never tries to diminish it. Like Uncle Ford does," Destiny observed with 7-year-old wisdom. "Exactly like Uncle Ford does," Gustavo agreed. "And I want that for her because I love all of you, including your mother, enough to want what's best for you." Carolina felt tears pricking her eyes as she began to understand what was happening. Ford moved to kneel beside her chair, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Carolina, these past few years have been the happiest of my life. Building a business with you, watching your daughters grow, being part of this incredible family. It's everything I never knew I wanted." "Uncle Ford," Poppy whispered, her eyes wide. "I love your mother completely," Ford continued, his voice strong and clear. "And I love each of you as if you were my own daughters. Carolina, will you marry me?" The proposal hung in the air like a perfect note of music. Carolina looked around the table at her daughters' expectant faces, at Gustavo's encouraging smile, at Ford's hopeful expression. "What do you think, girls?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "Should I marry Uncle Ford?" "Yes," 5 voices shouted in unison, followed by excited chatter about weddings and dresses and whether they could all be bridesmaids. "Then yes," Carolina said, laughing through her tears as Ford slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes, I'll marry you." The celebration that followed was chaotic and joyful, with the quintuplets demanding to see the ring, planning the wedding, and peppering Ford with questions about whether he'd officially become their stepfather. "But what about Daddy?" Harlow asked suddenly, the question that had been lurking beneath the excitement. All eyes turned to Gustavo, who smiled with genuine peace. "I'll always be your daddy, sweetheart. Nothing will ever change that. But Uncle Ford will be your stepfather, which means you'll have 2 fathers who love you. That makes you very lucky, girls. And we'll all live together?" Veda asked hopefully. Well, Carolina said carefully, Uncle Ford and I will live together after we're married. But Daddy has his own house, and you'll visit him there sometimes too. Actually, Gustavo said, I've been thinking about that. My house is too big for just me, and it's too far away from all of you. I'd like to find something closer. Maybe in the same town, so I can be nearby when you need me. Really? Destiny's face lit up. Really? Because the most important thing in my life is being the best father I can be to you girls. That means being available when you need me, supporting your dreams, and making sure you always know how much you're loved. As the afternoon progressed, the dynamics of their reconstituted family became clear. Gustavo would remain a devoted father, but Ford would be the day-to-day father figure. Carolina would have the love and partnership she deserved. And the quintuplets would have the security of knowing they were cherished by multiple adults who put their well-being above everything else. I have one more surprise, Gustavo announced as they sat on the back patio, watching the girls play in the garden. I've been working with a contractor to build something special. He pulled out architectural plans and spread them on the patio table. A playground. Right here on your property. Custom designed with input from each girl about what they'd like to include. A playground just for us? Poppy gasped. The best playground in Connecticut, Gustavo promised. With a reading nook for Destiny, monkey bars for Poppy, a quiet corner for Dylan to write, and a whole section designed like an underwater world for Harlow and Veda. When? All 5 girls demanded. Construction starts next week. It should be finished by Christmas. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, the 3 adults sat together while the children played nearby. The conversation flowed easily between them, discussions of wedding plans, custody schedules, and shared responsibilities. I need to say something, Gustavo said suddenly, his voice serious. Ford, I know how hard it must have been to watch me hurt Carolina and the girls. Thank you for being there when I wasn't. Thank you for loving them when I was too selfish to do it properly. Thank you for changing, Ford replied simply. For becoming the father they needed. It would have been easy to disappear permanently, but you chose to do the hard work instead. Carolina listened to the 2 men who had shaped her daughter's lives discussing co-parenting with mutual respect and genuine affection. This wasn't the life she'd planned 6 years ago, but it was better than anything she could have imagined. Mommy! Destiny called from the garden. Come see what we built. The 3 adults joined the quintuplets around an elaborate fairy house constructed from twigs, leaves, and imagination. It's for the fairy godmothers, Dylan explained. The ones who make sure families find each other. Even when they take a long time to figure it out, Harlow added, looking meaningfully at the adults. Even when they make mistakes first, Veda finished. As they admired the fairy house in the gathering twilight, Carolina felt a profound sense of completion. Her daughters had their father, their stepfather, their mother, and most importantly, the security of knowing they were loved unconditionally by everyone who mattered. 6 years ago, Gustavo had called her too old and infertile, then abandoned her for someone younger. Today, surrounded by their 5 brilliant daughters and preparing to marry a man who cherished her completely, Carolina knew that sometimes the best revenge was living well and loving deeply. The golden Ferrari sat in the driveway, no longer a symbol of vindication but simply a reminder of how far they'd all traveled. From abandonment to abundance, from betrayal to blended family, from broken trust to beautiful beginnings. Happy birthday, my loves, Carolina whispered to her daughters as they gathered for one final group hug of the day. Best birthday ever, they agreed in unison. And for the first time in 6 years, everyone who mattered was exactly where they belonged. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that choose each other rather than the ones that start perfectly. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, wait until you see what's coming next. It's even more powerful and inspiring than you can imagine. So don't go anywhere. Click on that video showing on your screen right now to dive into another amazing story that will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you won't regret it.